So, Tara, what are you seeing right now in terms of strategy execution with your clients or in the ecosystem?
The biggest thing is that the uncertainty is sort of feels off the chart for a lot of people. And that has impacted a lot of how people are thinking about things. And, there are a variety of reasons why that is true, the uncertainty, and there are as many impacts of the uncertainty in our world today, and the systemic uncertainty, meaning, this pandemic kind of hits everything. So it's somewhat unique to the time, even though uncertainty is not uncommon. It's the norm for us in business. So I think people in some respects are taken aback by how big it is. And that impacts both the strategy development phase and the execution, because, on the one hand, for many people, and the challenge in answering your question in a very specific way is that the challenges that everyone's facing, it runs the gamut, right? It's across the board. So I can't say, oh, well, do this or do that. I think there are a couple of things to think about. One is, what is the impact of the uncertainty on you? And I think there it's sort of, is it really big, or is it very small? Or is it somewhere in between? And if it's somewhere in between, particularly, then start thinking about, well, what are the key drivers, right? What are the things that are having the greatest potential impact for us, or the greatest real impact for us? And helping them to think through whether they're in the development stage of strategy or they're in the execution phase. There's a couple of things like narrow your focus, right? You've got to really pull it in tight. I was working with it's a nonprofit organization, pretty good size, but still relatively small footprint. And they really were struggling with what to do. They were supposed to be doing a new strategic plan for 5 years right about now. And they're like, we're so busy just figuring out how the heck to keep the doors open and the lights on, that the idea of planning 5 years out is really hard. And one of the key things that we did was really to look at it and say, okay, look, in strategy development, you've got to have a destination. You need a vision, right? So let's set a destination that's closer in. Why are we thinking 5 years out? We need to be able to take baby steps forward. So there's another great analogy. Have you ever walked a high wire?
No, I am definitely afraid of heights.
Yeah.
And that's not what
Okay, so you wouldn't even choose to walk a high wire, right? Well, what about a slack line? Do you know what that is? A slack line?
I do know what that is, and I definitely don't have. I'm not gonna say I have the body type for that, but no, it's still outside of my risk tolerance.
It's still a lot easier because it's only a little bit off the ground, right? And if you've watched somebody do it, right? Most of us don't choose to do high wire walking, and you can find all kinds of great images of people like over Niagara Falls or Iguazu in Brazil. Seriously, people, this is like really high buildings, tall buildings. These guys are off the charts in terms of their comfort with the risk and the uncertainty versus most of us. Slack lines, though, are kind of down to earth. They're only a few feet off the ground. The line is wider. The uncertainty is not as great, and the risk is not as great. And the key thing is that those guys are two things. One, they do take baby steps on the high wire, and they have a very different set of supports. So one of the things that people are doing right now, or that I'm encouraging them to do, is to identify what supports they need, and recognize also that while you have a fear of heights, I actually, most of the time, do not. I don't think I'm going to step on a high wire over Niagara Falls anytime soon, or from the Sears Tower in Chicago or something like that. But, I'm pretty good at thinking about some of these things. I wouldn't mind giving it a go, maybe a little budget, So I have a different risk tolerance. So that difference is what you see on your team as well. So you have to kind of figure out where your tolerance is for uncertainty and where your team is, and then figure out what supports you're going to need. Do you need a bar? Do you need a wider line? Do you need other forms of support to get yourself across? And the flip in, like what does that look like in business? Well, if you are leaping to the finish, you create gaps. And the greater the uncertainty, the bigger those gaps are, and you leave people behind. So stepping it through, narrowing the focus, being able to try and take those smaller steps so that you can adjust course very quickly becomes really important, and helping people to walk through that, and then being very clear around what you're trying to do.
So we've gone over, as a leader, if we have this like big gap, big level of uncertainty, and then say, okay, let's narrow the gap of uncertainty to make it, more clear, and then recognizing what kind of supports not only they need as individuals, but also what the team needs in order to support that. Like if we took it right into the like implementation of a strategic plan, let's say we've got that process, we've gotten aligned as a team, we've set that vision. Now, as we look, let's say even between 2021 and 2022, we're looking over like the next 12 months.
Right.
In your years of experience, what have you seen being the most effective sort of components that have led to making that strategy real, that has made it actionable, and that it's kept it like top of mind so that you know exactly where you're walking on a day-to-day basis? And if you have any practical examples without giving away who it is, that would be great.
Well, the faster, the more frequent the changes that are happening around you or that you're making, then the more often you need to stop and review. And that's counterintuitive because there's a lot of go, 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 right? All hands on deck, let's roll. But the faster you go, the more likely it is that you're going to have a harder time switching gears or making those little changes in course. So great. There are lots of examples and ones that people would be familiar with, right? The pandemic hit, everybody went home, right? We went home. Global shutdown, plane stopped, we went home. Companies immediately, including some of the guys that I work with, I had one client in particular, they're a government contractor, so very stable client that they're dealing with. And they basically took everybody home and got laptops to everybody, which may sound obvious, but they usually use desktops. They're very much a grounded in the office kind of company. And they have a lot of security requirements, so they don't as often use external equipment, right? So they had to change out all of their equipment, they had to fix their laptops, they had to change their network security very quickly, and then started checking in. And they changed when they meet, they sped up their calls, and they also started using a variety of tools. That's not uncommon. Some folks did it better than others. Shifting gears, look at what Airbnb did, right? Airbnb, we are familiar with globally. Airbnb went out and, their business kind of shut down overnight as well. What did they do? They started offering experiences, and they hadn't been doing that. They had thought about it. It was apparently on their back burner for quite a while. They went in and they just said, we got to do it. We're going to do it. And they pivoted that way, leveraging what they already know about their areas and their sites, because one of the things that they had been very good at and been gathering was the data, and the data around the places that people visit. And so that gave them the opportunity to start delivering a different kind of service really, really fast. And that's it. It's an easy and an obvious one. There are a bunch of stories. There's a great restaurant in Seattle, and in the US, for those of you who are not US based, in the US, the West Coast was hit earlier than other parts of the United States, and in particular, both California and the state of Washington, which is where Seattle is, were really having a tough time. The restaurants shut down, and of course, that's really hard if you're a small business to shut down like that. So this particular restaurant, which was a brand all about luxury, basically, like the view of the water and all the services that you get were a huge piece of their brand. And suddenly they couldn't capitalize on any of that. And they reframed what luxury looks like in a carryout. And they went to, delivery, they went to drive-by, and they changed not only that, but they had to then change their business model. And that's the key for them in terms of being able to survive, because they weren't able to just make it takeout and do everything else the same way. They had to really focus in on it and change how they were positioning themselves in the market. And they've been successful in staying afloat as well as like surviving. And if you talk to their CEO about it, or their leader, they are going to continue some of this stuff. Like it's really expanded how they think about their brand. And that's like sort of big company, tiny company sort of examples that are, and it's everything in between.
So what I heard out of that is like, for organizations through that big shift, big changes, that there's like big shifts at like the top or potentially externally, that in order to sort of keep up with that, you need commensurate changes in your operations, in your process, in your structure, whether that's like technology, whether that's how you do meetings, whether that's how you communicate, just everything you do. And it's like reframing and shifting. So versus like changing, and dare I use the word pivoting, but like actually just recognizing that you can't get the same results with the same actions, or different results with the same actions. So really make sure that that's clear.
Yeah. And you know what, Anthony, I think some of that's really, here we are a year later. And one of the things I think that people forget or fail to realize when they're doing any kind of a strategic initiative, I think some of those things are very obvious, what we talked about to many people to say, oh yeah, of course. And yet the obvious isn't always easy, right? Just because it's obvious or that's what you're supposed to do, making it happen, not so much. And constantly when you're executing strategy in any circumstance, you are adjusting and aligning strategy and operations on an ongoing basis. And the key thing is to not be wedded to the thing you designed at the beginning as being the end all be all. And I think that goes to sort of my definition of strategy. And if you Google or Bing or do a search on strategy definition, you get millions of hits. And it's really, for me, it comes down to something fairly simple. If your mission is your purpose, your vision's your destination, values, what we believe, how we behave, and then your strategy is simply the set of decisions and actions that get you where you want to go. And while it's true, right? It's true that you don't want to be changing massively your strategy all the time. The reality is that the work on the ground is constantly in flux, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And so like just going back to what we said earlier, if it's really in flux, or and that can be pandemic, or it can just be my business environment has changed for any reason, right? Then it's about saying, okay, well, where is it today? If the destination is the same, but the environment has changed, what are the key factors there that we need to be focused on and then be able to respond to? And you could do scenario thinking, you could do scenario planning. All that stuff's great. I'm not knocking it by any stretch of the imagination. But if you're not, you can spend your whole life thinking and planning. At the end of the day, you got to do. And the key thing is sort of using that to expand your brain and how you come at it, so that there are ideas on the shelf that you can kind of think about and help create clarity fast. But you've got to respond in the moment. And that's what the agility is about. And so the scenario thinking, scenario planning, all those kinds of activities help to build the muscle that allows you to be more agile.